Dear colleagues, dear friends, I know it's tough to interrupt now. I hope you have a nice meal. It's delicious. I really like that. And as a colleague in the industry, I'm very happy for the keynote speaker we have tonight. I was in the United States 1 year ago. I met FICO and Will Lansing, the DCU, 3 years ago. And we had discussions about fraud and other items. And they really have a knowledge. And I'm working in Schufa, Germany, a credit information company. And I think fraud is a theme that concerns all of us. And I think what FICO has done the last year has been very interesting. And I think we have some very exciting keynote speech here today. I want to introduce Dr. Andrew Jennings, who is the Chief Analytical Officer at FICO, and he's heading the FICO lab as well. He's British, you probably will hear that later, and he's been living in California for 16 years and left Brighton to went to California. I think it was an easy decision to do. And he's been heading, before he went to the United States, he was heading the European activities from FICO. And I think he has some really interesting items to discuss. And if you look at and see what he done before, he has a PhD from Nottingham. He was a lecturer at Nottingham as well. And he was working as a head of unsecured credit risk at Abbey National before that. So we really have an industry professional. I'm very happy to have him here tonight. And welcome, Dr. Jennings.
Sheriff of Nottingham? No. Robin Hood. Every time. So I don't think everybody needs to look at my mugshot while I'm stood here. That's too much to ask. It really is too much to ask. So thank you for that kind introduction, Peter. I'm just going to close this down because I do actually need to look at my notes, and now that I'm getting older, I need to wear a pair of glasses. So it's a little bit of a logistic challenge for me. So I'd like to also thank everybody for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be here and give this talk. So it's about fraud, right? And winning the war on financial crime, the promise of an integrated analytics and risk-based approach. Well, let's see where that takes us. But I have to say that one of the defining features, certainly of identity fraud, are people that go around in purple jackets, masquerading as important people in an esteemed association like this. I think that's just, blatant. Don't approve this guy ever. And I'd also tell you, this is the second I don't do a lot of after dinner speaking. I do a lot of other speaking, but this is the second after dinner speech that I've given this year. The first one was at my daughter's wedding. So I'll let you can decide which one was more important to me. No offense. And the wedding speech, of course, also has the great advantage is you don't have to have a title, or you don't have to issue a summary beforehand either. You can talk about whatever you like when you get up there. I hope you, I'm just going to move this because it's right in my face. Hopefully, can you still hear me if I do that? Is that fine? Okay. Good. Yeah, I'll move forward. I'll be back in the same place. So, this is good, right? You're laughing. I haven't even got to the jokes. I mean, amazing, absolutely amazing. I'm going to start picking on people in the audience and like a stand-up comedian. But anyway, so I got to say, I think a way of introduction here. I love Hong Kong. It's a great place to visit, and I was thinking about this as after I got the invite to talk, and I must admit the invite was a little vague to start with, but I said yes, and all of a sudden I was on a panel and doing this. Okay, so I thought Hong Kong, that's a great place to be, and it got me thinking back to the first time I came here, where I just joined FICO, and that was 20-something years ago. I've been there a lot longer than I ever thought I would be. Done every job apart from CEO and CFO, I think, in one shape, form, or another. And I was thinking about this, and I was kind of like this British guy who'd not been many places. I've been to France on holiday, but I'd certainly not been to the Far East. And it's a full-on, in-your-face experience. Bicycles. Although I have to say, on this particular visit, I think I've seen more people driving Teslas than I have riding bikes. More like California in that regard. But the thing that really struck in my mind as I was trying to think of this, relative to this topic of fraud and analytics, was, of course, those of you that were traveling here back in those days will remember the airport. Okay? And the airport was one of the best things about coming to Hong Kong. So I was, on my way in here on a British Airways flight, and you probably remember that those of you who are old enough or came here in those days, you come in over the rooftops, and it's like you can kind of reach out and see the washing, and you feel like you can pick it off the top of the rooftops, and so on and so forth. And I was on this British Airways flight, and we're coming into land, and we had a captain who I will only describe as being very British, and you will see what that means. So he came on the intercom, and he delivered a message that was something like this, and I'm going to do this with the accent, of course, which is a little accentuated. Said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're on our way into Hong Kong. We expect to be on the ground in the next 10 minutes, blah, 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 blah." And said, "Buckle up, here we go." And so those of you who've done this will know what's coming next, right? So off we go. We hit the ground at what seemed like about 500 miles an hour. There was smoke visible from the wheels. I had the unfortunate experience of actually being in the window seat, so I could kind of see what was going on. There were white faces all around. There were all these kind of strange sounds coming from the galley, and we hit the runway, and it seemed like we turned it left at about 500 miles an hour. It was sort of Grand Prix racing in a 747, and then into the gate we went. And our jovial captain comes back on the intercom and says, "Gosh, that was fun, wasn't it? Welcome to Hong Kong." So at the time, when I was still living in England, of course, and I played badminton with on every Friday night. I was playing badminton, and one of the people that I played with happened to be a BA pilot. And he said to me, he said, "You know why this happens?" He says, "The only way to get a 747 on the ground in Hong Kong is to come in fast, hit the ground hard, the nose goes down, and you slam the anchors on." Wow. And I thought, the nose goes down, it digs in, and you slam the anchors on, and you come in hard and fast. And I thought, that sounds like a fraud attack to me. Hit hard and fast, and then slam the anchors on as a reaction, right? And that was pretty much always the case, and it sort of is the case in individual fraud cases. And I'm talking now more about transaction fraud in the card world than perhaps in the business world. The fraudster gets hold of a card by whatever means it may be, and the little first transaction happens just to figure out whether the card's valid, and then you hit hard and fast. All right, and then if that happens en masse, then the fraud managers start writing rules to try and stop all of that. And as an analytics guy, I think of that and I think, oh dear, just let the damn analytics do the job, will you, and stop writing all those rules, because that's an admission of failure. But that was sort of like the way it was, hard and fast, slam the anchors on and try and stop things. But today, I think we live in a much more complicated world than that. And cards, as we all know, cards disappear en masse. They don't get they still get stolen in ones and twos, but that's trivial, right? The big deal is that they get stolen en masse. And it's maybe not just cards, it's personal data, it's medical data and records, and so on and so on. And if you've been watching the news recently, in the UK, a certain mobile company just had a whole lot of personal information stolen. So it's everywhere. It's not just banks, right? Banks are on the receiving end of a lot of this, but the banks are not the only places which get targeted. And the other thing that's changed is that the resulting losses can take months to manifest themselves. That doesn't happen overnight. Right? You don't steal 10 million identities and all of a sudden all those identities get actually compromised within a matter of hours. The stealing of the data happens in a matter of minutes, but the implications of it play out over a long, long period of time. Now, the latest fraud figures from the Nielsen report, I mean, many of you will be familiar with the Nielsen report, but card losses, and I think as best as I know, this was all card losses, so it would include company cards as well as personal cards. In 2014, it's $16.3 billion. That was 19% higher than the year before. And they forecast that that loss rate would rise to 35 billion by the year 2020. Now, if you dig down below that number, the actual rate of increase is slowing, but the problem's obviously getting bigger. It's a non-trivial problem, $35 billion worth of losses. And we're here in Asia, and that problem here in Asia is particularly pertinent because, albeit that the fraud losses here at the moment, let's say, are lower than they are in America, the actual card turnover, also in the Nielsen report here in Asia, is forecast to go from 5.3 trillion, which is roughly 30% of the world turnover of card transactions, to 13 trillion US dollars, which is 50% of the world's turnover by the year 2020. So on the basis that fraudsters go where the money is, and the turnover is Asia in general is now 50%, will be 50% of the world's turnover, we can only conclude that the fraud problem in Asia is going to get worse, it's not going to get better. So I'm not going to spoil your dinner, hopefully you're enjoying your dinner, so if it gets a little worse before it gets better. So now at the risk of spoiling everyone's lovely dinner, I'm afraid the news gets even worse, right? Because the problem everywhere is, everywhere in this room, people in this room are facing, isn't just about data security, or it isn't just about fraud losses, although the link between those two things is becoming clearer and clearer. Many of us will be familiar with the expression, today's data breach is tomorrow's fraud loss. But today's data breach and tomorrow's fraud loss are painful challenges that sit right alongside the seemingly never-ending and seemingly never ever present compliance fines, which now run to billions of dollars, not to mention the reputational risk. So when we talk about these numbers and we say, you know, it's losses that are measured in billions, which is a big number, and turnover that's measured in trillions, my point really is that that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the way that data insecurity and fraud and data breaches manifest themselves. But the real losses occur, the potential real losses to the corporation, occur in these ways that affect your reputation and the reputation more so of our clients, as well as data providers, because data providers get breached as well, as we know. And there was a recent Wall Street Journal survey that said 42% of US consumers consider security threats to be the biggest reason they would take their business elsewhere. So the consumer, certainly the consumer in the Western world, is highly attuned to this risk now. And I got written down here, does anybody fancy a VW moment? Right. Just look at it, VW. I mean, I know they're not, well, they are actually, they certainly make more money from finance than they do from selling VW branded cars, because the margins on them are very small. But you need to look no further than Volkswagen to see the devastating effects of a breach of trust. And a data breach is a breach of trust. It's a manifestation of a loss of confidence by the consumer in the company that's providing that service, whatever service it may be to the consumers. And you know, it's going to take many, many years and billions of dollars for Volkswagen to recover. And I would even go as far as to say in the US market, they may never recover, because their main play in the US market was diesel. And clearly we know where that's gone. So we have data security challenges. We have the related problem of fraud losses, which can trail security breaches by weeks and months and even years. And we have risks related to compliance and reputation. All of them interrelated, one spilling over into the other. And so the question then, to come back to the title, is what can analytics do to help? So I'm often asked to comment about analytics. It's sort of why I'm here, and I'm on a panel tomorrow. And you know, a few months ago, I was telling Peter I was at the Edinburgh Credit Scoring Conference and giving a keynote speech there. And so that, you know, everybody wants to know, so what are you FICO guys doing on the analytic front, and you know, what problems are you solving, and so on and so forth. So all of that reminds me of Albert Einstein. And you're thinking, what's he talking about? What's Albert Einstein got to do with this? So hopefully everybody knows who Albert Einstein was. and eventually perhaps this will become clear to you. So I'm going to tell you a story, in other words. So Albert Einstein, he did a lot of after-dinner speeches. And because he was, unlike me, and because he was famous, he also had a chauffeur. And the chauffeur not only drove the car, but he also used to sit in the audience. And the other thing was that the chauffeur bore more than a semblance, you know, he was resembled, let's say, it was more than a passing resemblance to the great man himself. So it's one evening, Einstein's in the car with a chauffeur, they're on their way to some event for Einstein to give his normal speech. And he leans forward and he says to the chauffeur, he said, "I've just had enough. I just can't do this anymore. Tonight, I am not going to give this after-dinner speech. Sorry. You have got to do it. You sit in the audience every night. You look like me. You know exactly what to say. You do it. You can wear my jacket." And so I have a little bit of discussion and they hatch a plan, and lo and behold, chauffeur's going to give the speech. So the chauffeur gives a speech, applause ensues, grown men cry, you know, it's all good. And then comes the Q&A. And somebody comes up with a question. Of course, this is where it all goes wrong, right? When you give a speech, people ask you questions. And then comes a Q&A. Up comes the first question, and the chauffeur doesn't know the answer. Never been asked that question before. But he's smart. And so he rubs his chin, and he's deep in thought, and he says, "You know what? That question is so easy, my chauffeur could answer that question." Now, just in case you're wondering, I do not have a chauffeur in the audience. And the point of this story will actually become clear. It will become clear, I hope. So as someone who's dedicated a major part of their career to analytics, I'd love to be able to stand up here and say, "No problem, we got it covered. This whole security thing, compliance, fraud, the whole lot, don't worry about it. Analytics has got it covered." Alas, that's not what I'm going to say. Analytics is indeed very powerful, but no analytics solution in and of itself is going to get us out of this predicament. It just won't. Rather, we need a different way. We need to think about a different way of tackling this problem. Addressing security and fraud as separate problems, as it's done in most institutions today, creates opportunities for criminals to exploit, because we have this like disparate ad hoc policies and attempts to solve the problem. I think, moreover, limiting the role of the risk management function in the companies that we sell to and serve and even maybe perhaps work in does a disservice to the tremendous body of knowledge that we have about risk. So we should be applying that knowledge to the problems of compliance, risk and fraud in a coordinated way. So what I foresee happening over the next several years is a convergence, or perhaps one might say even a collision, between the risk management function, the security function in organizations around the world. So just think about it. Okay? Those organizations, all that data that's being generated today is not only a potential threat, but it's also a source of potential intelligence. It's a source. It's not only the source of the problem, but it could be part of the source of the solution to the problem. So who will be the first to harness that potential? Not only to assess credit risk, but also to understand and manage fraud risk, compliance risk, and reputational risk, and then to determine the best decisions. We in FICO, we always talk about decisions. What's the decision that you're going to take? And is that a job for the risk officer, or the CIO, or who is it in the organization that's going to take that lead? So let me give you some examples, because I have to talk about analytics. So in the cybersecurity world, the question isn't whether you've been breached. The bots are there. They're there already. The question is more about, is the information getting out of the organization? And the really frightening thing in all of this is that the breaches happen in a matter of seconds. In the case of the telco company that I mentioned a moment ago, I read a couple of days ago that a young kid, I think he was 15 years old, was was arrested but later released in Northern Ireland with suspicion of having planted a very simple SQL script. So these things happen in seconds. The data can leave the organization in seconds or over a long period of time. But the real challenge is that nobody recognizes it. Nobody actually knows that it's happening. And so we need to find a better way of actually understanding that these things are happening. So if you've ever spent time in an enterprise security center, then you'll know that one of the biggest problems is sifting through all these alerts. Everybody has these alert systems. And somebody sits, you see pictures of somebody sitting in front of 6 television screens and they're all going up like this, one after the other. What do? You have no idea. Nobody has any idea what's really important and what's not important. And so it's knowing how to respond to the many, many alarms that are going off all at once. What alert shall I deal with first? What threshold shall I set to program an automated response? Which IP address resolution requests are more suspicious than others? What constitutes suspicious? Is it simply something new, or is it something that varies with the time of day? It might be normal for certain financial inquiries to be happening during the working day, but at midnight it might be highly suspicious, or vice versa. So, for various reasons, the sort of traditional analytic way of tackling this problem just doesn't work, right? In the normal analytic world, we look at people who paid and people who didn't pay, and we go back in time and we say, what do we know about these people? And we build a model. But that's not what we're here for, right? In this world, there aren't even though there are a lot of cyber crime, there aren't enough of them to apply that standard sort of statistical approach. And they all vary, or they're all kind of, one is different from another, it happens in a different way. It might be a thing that's embedded in a software that's embedded in the point of sale. It might be some script that's taking data out of a database and so on. There's many different ways it happens. So we're really in the anomaly detection business. We're not in the predicting outcomes business. And so we need a new breed of models to do that. We need a new breed of models to be able to understand unusual behaviors and recalibrate those behaviors as the distribution of the descriptors of that behavior, like the time of day and what's happening where, as those change through the course of the day. And this analytic technique is useful for credit risk management and for fraud management, and most exciting, I think, it can now be applied in the security world as well. So this concept of applying analytics to anomaly detection and having models calibrate and adjust in real time. This is the future of analytics in the security and fraud world. And also in security and fraud, just like it is in credit, it's important to balance risk with reward. Now it's easy, like, you can say it's easy to control credit risk, you just don't approve anybody. And it's easy to control credit card fraud, you just don't authorize any transactions. Unfortunately, that puts you out of business. And there is more and more focus these days on understanding who my best customers are so that I don't turn down their transactions. So let me mention how some of the things that we're working on in that regard in order to better understand who the best customers are. And the same concept can also be applied in the cybersecurity world as well. So it's a sort of illustration of how these things overlap and how the analytic techniques collide, as well as the forces that cause this to be an important topic. So I have some notes here in front of me. It's a document. Okay? So we can borrow concepts from the text analytics world to help us fight cyber crime and fraud. You might think, yeah, don't believe that. Well, it's true, you can. And just like in the text world, we can describe documents by keywords. Right? You read an academic paper, it's got keywords across the top. You could analyze these notes I've got in front of me, and it would say fraud, security, analytics, and from that you could probably work out what the topic was about. You can do exactly the same thing with transactions. Transactions are like words. They could be for people, or they could be for computers. They're just entities in a transaction. A person makes a transaction, a computer makes a transaction. It looks to another computer and gets a response. It tries to resolve an IP address or whatever it may be. And if you understand the distribution of those words, or you understand the distribution of these transactions, then you can start to understand anomalies, right? You can say, this document is different from the document that I have. I can't classify this document as being about economics because it's actually about football, he said, looking across there. I forgot to mention this. AIA, for those of you that know your Premier League, is the shirt sponsor of my all-time favourite football team. But anyway, so it's quite impressive to stand here and see AIA over there on that building. So, you know, you would have a document that's about football and a document that's about economics, and you could figure out that they're different. And you can do the same thing. I can say, this person's transactions look different than they used to look. That's an anomaly. And I can create distance measures on that, and I can therefore say, this card has been compromised. The probability this card has been compromised is higher because this profile, this analogy to a word profile is changing too rapidly. And as a result of that, I can use that analytics to predict that something's gone awry. And I can do exactly the same thing in a cyber world where I can see that the normal way that transactions occur between two entities and a network change too rapidly. And that's an indication that some compromise has taken place. So as a final example, I was talking to Peter about this before I got up here. The context was different because it was to do with driving data. The mobile phone, here's another example of the application of the same ideas. Right? We all use mobile phones. We all hold them in slightly different ways. We do different things with them at certain, at certain times of the day, like switching the torch on and off. And so we can profile, just as the way we can profile transactions, we can profile the way that a mobile phone is used. And we can use that kind of information to predict whether the same person is using it that normally uses it. So there's 3 examples of how particularly in the Internet of Things world, because this is all about data that streams at you, comes at you at volume. 3 examples of how analytics can help. They will help identify things that are out of the ordinary. But it's going to take a bit more than that if we're going to successfully fight financial crime. So fraud and security and compliance, hopefully you're with me, and agree that they're kind of inextricably linked. The risks are linked, the manifestations are linked, and ultimately the solutions to them also need to be linked. And we're actually beginning to see this happen. There are a couple of UK banks that are moving in this direction where they're kind of moving towards this situation where one person is going to be in charge of all of these functions. And what's driving that is also because the board is interested, the board of directors wants to know about reputational risk, they want to know about fraud risk and all those things. They want one person to be responsible for that. So it's beginning to happen. And so ultimately, as analytics and technology ultimately analytics and technology more broadly can only go so far. As leaders in this room, as leaders who believe in the power of business information and data and analytics generally, we have a responsibility here, either directly within our own companies or within the companies that we do business with. And who better for those of us than those of us in this room to take up that challenge? We have to think beyond the limits of our current roles, our current hierarchies, our current functional silos that have been built up in our institutions, and for no other reason, if no other better reason, that criminals and perpetrators of fraud are thinking beyond those silos, and they are succeeding. And so unless we change, they will continue to succeed, because fraudsters are not going away. I don't care what payment scheme anybody comes up with, the fraudsters are not going away. And the challenge isn't in the design of the payment scheme, it's in the implementation of the payment scheme. And humans implement those things, and then they get stuff wrong. And there's always a weakness. So as much as I believe in the power of analytics, these are ultimately problems that need to be solved by human beings. We have to organize to set a strategy to make best use of technology, and to understand how we work together, and and to understand our organizational priorities. So I want to leave you, before I close here, I want to leave with 3 proposals. So if you're already doing this, please stick at it. First thing is, talking is good. So the first thing we have to do is to get people talking about this collision and this overlap and this linkage between fraud and security and compliance. So that's number 1. Let's start talking about it. And it could be within your own organization, or it could be when you go out and you're doing business with banks and you know, people take the lead. Leadership. It needs somebody to take the lead to get things moving. Secondly, engage in discussions and help people understand the interconnectedness of their functions and what their challenge is. As I said, today's data breach is tomorrow's fraud loss. So if you're the fraud manager, you can't ignore data breaches. And if you're the security manager, you can't avoid or can't ignore fraud losses and so on. And finally, because these are deep and complex problems, you can't boil the ocean. Focus on decisions. Focus on business outcomes, and focus on trying to make things change. Tackle one problem at a time. It's not possible to solve this problem all in one fell swoop. And while the challenge is great, as I said, it isn't necessary to tackle everything all in one go. We can create change through being catalysts for change. And that makes a real impact. And you can be an Einstein in your own organization, regardless of whether your job title begins with the letter C. So in other words, you don't have to be a chauffeur. And you don't have to be a chief anything either, right? It can come from lower down. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the dinner and the rest of the conference.